All right, thank you so much for joining our webinar. We're so excited to have you with us. This is a great call with lots of awesome members with us. Senator Paul Pinsky, Senator Joe Carter, Senator Gail Acevero, Delegate Acevero, Delegate Carr, Delegate Vaughn Stewart. Let me turn this over to Francis Huey. He's our Howard County Chair. Hey, Francis.
Hello, hey, welcome to tonight's call. If you've been on an Arab call before, you know the drill. Put your name, your location in the chat. Let everybody know who you are, where you're from. We're really excited tonight to have two great Maryland state senators and 4 state delegates with us to discuss the legislative session. If you have questions for them, put them in the Q&A rather than the chat. So we got people coming in from all over here. Bethesda, Catonsville, Randallstown, Frederick, more friends from Howard. Hey, good to see you. Baltimore, Hyattsville, Charles County. This is all over the state. Great. Yeah. And we, let's see, what else was I going to say? Sorry. That's about it for me. So 7 p.m., let me turn the meeting over to our Revolution MoCo chair and my spouse, Kat Wee.
Hello, thank you, Francis. We'll start the forum in just a moment, but I do want to discuss some of the organizing that our Revolution Maryland activists are doing in addition to holding this great forum. In November, Francis and I were in Pennsylvania canvassing for John Fetterman, and of course, we did manage to win that one. So that was a great success. I have just come back, flew in today from Georgia. As you can see in that picture, that's our crew. We were canvassing with UFCW and Unite Here, knocking doors for John Warnock. Again, we won that one. I came back very, very late last night. So if I'm looking a little tired, that's because we were up very late celebrating with Senator Warnock, who did speak to us at the watch party, and it was a great win. People were very, very high spirits last night. Going on, yesterday morning, our Revolution leaders, including state organizer Hal Ginsberg, were on Capitol Hill rallying with members of Congress, Ro Khanna and Rashida Tlaib, to kill Joe Manchin's dirty deal, which would be devastating for Maryland if it passes. On the left is a little bit soggy Hal Ginsberg with a very patient Rashida Tlaib with him. Even though it was raining, we had many members come out. And of course, again, we won, at least for now. But we know the issue is not going to go away. Continuing to bake our planet is just too profitable for fossil fuel industry, and it's bought and paid for politicians. So we will probably be seeing this again. Although it goes without saying, we are saying that we need your support to keep organizing and winning. So please join us to become a full member and or contribute at the links on the screen and in the chat. We're here to discuss progressive legislation that can become Maryland law in 2023. In just a moment, Delegate Sheila Ruth will commence the forum. We hope you will join our State House team and staff and join. If it's in the click on ourrev.us/MD team to join. The link will also be in the chat if you want to join us. And one last thing, if you have questions for any of the legislators or senators, including for Delegate Sheila Ruth, please put them in the Q&A and we will ask as many as possible. And now it is my honor to turn the program over to our Revolution Baltimore program, Delegate Sheila Ruth.
Great, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to conversations with our distinguished guests. It's the 2023 session is coming up quickly. It's going to be a new day with a Democratic governor and a lot of good new people in the in the legislature. And so really looking forward to seeing what we can accomplish, but we definitely need your support. So please join that legislative team to help support and make sure that we can get all these priorities passed. I want to start by welcoming Senator Paul Pinsky. Senator Pinsky has been a friend to our revolution for many years. He represents District 22 in Prince George's County in the Senate, where he served since 1994. Prior to that, he served in the House of Delegates. He chairs the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee and has been a champion on many issues, including environment. Most recently, sponsored and championed the Climate Solutions Now Act of 2022. Senator Pinsky, welcome.
Sheila, thank you very much. And OR, thank you for inviting me. Sheila, you mentioned we have a new governor. So I think that context is something we have to understand. We don't know what his agenda is, what legislation he's going to promote, support, or in fact, possibly oppose. So I think that might shade a lot of the efforts that come forward, even progressive ones. That being said, he's already mentioned that he would like to move up the $15 minimum wage, which would be very important. It's going to cost money. The private sector will raise hell. But I think if he follows through on that initiative, that's something that we need to get behind. It got slowed down in its passage. It got watered down, as many of you know. So moving that legislation more quickly would be a great thing. And I'm looking forward to working with the governor on doing that. Another important progressive measure, and I'm going to leave most of this to my colleague, Joe Carter, is a follow-up on the police accountability. We instilled a fair amount of some power with the Attorney General to look at police-initiated shootings of civilians. And they just released a report. Unfortunately, at least one county has thumbed its nose at the Attorney General. Harford County said, we're not going to give you the data. We're not going to let you be involved in the investigation. So my understanding is JPR, Senator Carter, Senator Smith are going to have follow-up legislation to make it even stronger, to have the Attorney General's office be involved, more engaged, not only be involved in the investigation, but maybe even take further legal action. So I think that's very progressive. This started a number of years ago. Senator Carter was one of the leaders. So I think that's another progressive element as well. Look, I don't see a lot of initiative on economic justice, which is sad. It's probably the one area we've not made progress in a significant way. Look, we've put combined reporting in to go after the corporations. That hasn't had the legs we need and the power behind it to get it moving. A number of us, Delegate Carr, Palakovich Carr has, and I have had progressive taxation legislation, but they haven't moved. So, I'm not sure there's a clear, explicit progressive agenda that is formed quite yet. In terms of me personally, last year in the climate bill that you referred, we had legislation about construction of schools. The state should lead by example, whether it's electric vehicles, whether it's using clean energy, whether it's building schools in a green way. Much of that was negated and removed from the bill. So we're going to come back because schools in every community across the state should start to be green, should start to use heat pumps, should start to move to a full electric or geothermal. And that would be a great education as well as helping the environment from Cecil County to Somerset County to Garrett County. It shouldn't just be in the core areas of Baltimore, Howard, Montgomery, and Prince George's. We have to spread that out. So that's one of the issues I'm going to work on. There'll probably be some other follow-up issues, and I look forward to working with OR in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Pinsky. And as I mentioned in my introduction, you sponsored and championed the comprehensive climate bill, Climate Solutions Now of 2022. We didn't get everything in that bill that we had hoped to get, but it's a transformative bill, which does a lot. Are there steps that need to be done now to implement that bill?
There are many, Sheila, and part of the bill, the initial proposal called for full electrification of new buildings. That was removed. The utilities fought tooth and nail, so that didn't get in. Although I'm proud to see what Montgomery County has done in doing it locally. A study is going to happen. They'll come back in like 12 or 15 months, so that issue is not going to go away. We've gone after low-hanging fruit. We have to make some tough choices now. And one of the important parts of the bill is that by 2030, all large buildings of 35,000 square feet have to reduce their greenhouse gases by 20%. Not too many states have that. I'm pretty proud of that, but there's still a lot to be done. And so we're moving to a phase of implementation. You know, we might have to come back with other solutions, but we have to have a new Department of the Environment, MEA, Maryland Energy Administration, begin to take the steps necessary to put it into place.
Great, thank you. You mentioned economic justice and also progressive taxation, and obviously those two go hand in hand. We need to ensure that the wealthy are paying their, their fair share, and reduce the income inequality. Do you see any steps that we could take this session, or anything that you're thinking of in terms of moving forward on that?
Well, I think we all have a lot of ideas, but unfortunately, I've been in the legislature a long time. We've made some progress on social justice. We've made progress on environmental justice, but the corporate sector has basically blocked us at every corner in terms of really bringing economic justice to working families and poor folks. I think we have to be bold. I think we have to move in that direction. I haven't spoken to the governor about where he stands on that. I think it's crucial, but unfortunately, it's been an Achilles heel in the Maryland legislature.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So at this point, I'm going to, if you could stand by, Senator Pinsky, we're going to take some questions from the audience in just a few minutes. I'm going to move to Senator Jill Carter. Civil rights and justice are in Senator Carter's blood as she continues the legacy of her father, civil rights leader Walter P. Carter. Senator Carter has served in the Senate since 2018, where she sits on the Judicial Proceedings Committee. She served in the House of Delegates from 2003 to January 2017, and in between, she led Baltimore's Office of Civil Rights and Wage Enforcement. Senator Carter has been a civil rights leader, including in the critical work of police reform. She represents District 41 in Baltimore City. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator Carter.
Hello, family. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for having me. I'm happy to just jump right in. Senator Pinsky, it's nice to see you. And let me say that he started off talking about the most critical issue on the table, which is, frankly, now that we have a Democrat governor, and now that we have even more of a supermajority in the Senate and the House, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do now that we cannot hide behind this false notion that we've got to fight Republicans, or that we've got to give all of our support to Democrats in Purple District? And that's the reason that we have gridlock and we can't get progressive items done. And so our responsibility is to hold our party accountable, to live up to those ideals that made all of us become members of this party. So with that being said, and let me tell you, it can be tough. It is tough to challenge your friends. It's not so tough to challenge your enemies, but it's really hard sometimes to challenge your friends, especially when those friends happen to be also your leaders. And so that being said, we're going to start off with early pre-filing. As the great Delegate Sheila Ruth knows, the bill that we had last year that was vetoed, it wasn't overridden by the Democrats. We're going to start with pre-filing the equity and transportation, and also for Baltimore City, democratizing our school board, allowing more elected members, including students, which was vetoed but chosen not to be overridden. And then finally, what's the biggest issue on the table this year, in my opinion, is what we are going to do now that the voters have spoken and legalized recreational adult use cannabis. What are we going to do in terms of ensuring that there is equity in licensing, who can obtain licenses? It is critically important that we don't set up a structure that relegates that or limits it to the super rich, the nouveau rich, the people, the corporatists, the people that already have licenses within the medical industry. That is critically important. And there are ways to do it. And we've had work groups for years. We've had many discussions, and some of those proposals on the table are the kinds of idea of multiple ideas: mentor protege, ensuring that the proposals that are offered by the potential licensees incorporate all minorities at every level. We were fortunate to get, as part of our legislation that passed last year, something very important in terms of community reinvestment. We were able to get 30% of the tax revenue profits to be targeted to the jurisdictions most harmed or most affected by arrest for marijuana under prohibition. And so we will see some gains, I think, for community reinvestment there, but I'm very concerned about the top level and who we allow to profit from this industry as individuals. And then also, of course, we've got to fix all of the criminal justice parts. We have taken some steps in terms of expungement of simple possession, but we got to deal more seriously with the crimes of possession with intent to distribute. And we also have to deal with those crimes that have been brought because of marijuana as a precursor, the odor of marijuana being the reason that a person is stopped or searched. We have to address those issues, or we frankly do a disservice to the people. And I think that this is really, really a pivotal moment because this is a new industry. And so when we talk about economic justice, we have a real opportunity now to ensure economic justice in a way we have not in the past. And so I think that we have to focus on the marijuana as a tool, a vehicle to bring about that economic justice. I have a couple of other things, and I always sometimes have the unenviable role of talking about things that may not always be sexy or on everyone's radar. One of those things I want to bring to the fore is the idea that many, many of my colleagues that are well-intentioned support, but I do not support it. And I would ask the members to consider this position. And so for many years, like way before I was even a member of the House of Delegates back in the day, there have been an effort to eliminate, to get rid of judicial elections altogether, circuit court retention elections. Circuit court judges are appointed and then they run year 1 and year 15. And there's been an effort to eliminate that and say, judges shouldn't have to ever run for election. They shouldn't have to address the people. There should be this, select group that is able to select our judges and then nominate them to the governor and the governor appoints. I think it will be a disservice to the people of the state of Maryland to ruin the only chance they have in this entire process of selecting judges to preside over the most serious cases of their lives in their jurisdiction. People have one chance to have a say in who that is. And I think we must find a way to retain that power to the people and not make judges just be very exclusive, selected by an elite group. And yes, we have a Democrat governor, so some may think, well, the judicial nominating commissions are all going to be good. That's still not the point. The point is that we have in statute the requirements to be a judge. We should frankly honor those requirements. And so with that being said, I know I have 100,000 other things to talk about, but I'm going to, well, really quickly, we still have to stop the automatic charging of children as adults, which has been something around for a very long time, and just a myriad of other things, but I'm happy to stop and take questions.
Thank you so much, Senator. Sorry, I forgot to unmute there. So in terms of the judges, I really appreciate your comments on that. And I agree, we need to make sure that they are accountable to the people. But one of the issues I have as someone who's not a lawyer is I never know how to vote because I don't really know anything about their records. Can you give any recommendations on how people can better know how to vote on the judges?
So I think that it's important to keep it judges elected, because I don't agree with some people that think, well, it's not appropriate to have judges go and talk to people. I absolutely think that, many of us that aren't in the courts don't know who the judges are, but that's not the burden of the people. That's the people that want to serve. So I think the judges, that's why more reason why we need to keep the elections. Judges need to take their cases to the people. And, for that false argument that, well, a judge can't talk about their cases or whatever. No, they don't have to talk about the cases, but they can talk about justice generally. They can talk about where they stand generally. They can talk about how they arrive at their decisions. They can talk about their philosophies on criminal justice and on sentencing and civil justice as well, because they preside over civil and criminal. So I think that's an important thing to keep. And I'll tell you, I'm very worried about it. I think that there's a real movement afoot now to get rid of it in a way that there wasn't before.
Great. Thank you so much. You mentioned the transportation equity bill, and I've heard you talk very powerfully about transit apartheid. Could you speak on that a little bit?
Well, you know that we have that transit apartheid. We have a lot of other things that are unjust, but basically where I live and where I represent in Baltimore City, I personally can't rely on any type of public transportation to get me around the city. And so if I were, like as many of my constituents, a person that had to rely on public transportation to get to my job, to get around to see my family, it would be very difficult to do. So the equity in transportation is something that, frankly, I think Delegate Ruth is your brainchild, but it's very much needed. And everybody knows about how Baltimore suffered when Governor Hogan came in and decided to eliminate the red line, which many of us have been counting on for a very long time. And so it's time to have what our bill would seek to do is to make sure that the decisions as we move forward with transportation, what transportation is offered to communities, what type of transportation, whether it's above the ground or fast rail or whatever, that decisions of equity would factor into what the outcome is. And so I think if we had that, for example, we would not have had a cancellation of the red line.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. One last question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kat. We passed the comprehensive police reform in 2021, and some of the counties have been, let's say, exploiting loopholes in that, both the composition of the police accountability boards, and also including my own county as one of those that's having some issues. So the police accountability boards are one issue, and then I know the Anton's Law, my county and Montgomery County, I think, have put in place some, review, which are, I think, violating the spirit of the law. Do you know if there's going to be any efforts to close those loopholes?
Oh, yeah. So one of the things I have requested a pre-file of the Police Accountability Board bill. And so really quickly, because these things can get a little complex, but bottom line is this. In our legislation, Senator Pinsky talked about the idea of some jurisdictions that are still not prosecuting and not honoring the spirit of the law that we passed before. And so I support the idea behind that legislation to move more into the Attorney General, but I think we have to be careful we have to proceed with caution, even there. The bottom line, though, is that police accountability boards were intended, as we passed it, to be boards made up of the people of a jurisdiction. And the idea behind it was to be similar to, but better than the currently existing in Baltimore, and I think Montgomery County has a version, civilian review boards. And what has happened now is that my jurisdiction, and maybe yours and others, are deciding that we didn't really want the police accountability boards to have any power. We're going to give all of that to the administrative charging committees. That's a bad idea, because those committees utilize the internal process of investigations. They still have internal affairs making the investigations, even though they have charging powers and discretion. The idea was that the police accountability boards would have an independent ability to investigate these cases themselves, outside of what is presented to them by the internal affairs divisions. And so I would ask that everybody support that. I mean, again, if we believe what we said when we passed the Police Accountability Act, we said that we wanted people to be able to trust the police, and that we wanted the police to work for the people. And so the concept that anyone could oppose a group of civilians making decisions about how they are policed in their community and when there is misconduct and conducting investigations, I don't think, they're very inconsistent with the concept that the police work for the people.
Thank you so much, Senator. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kat, and she's going to bring in some questions from the audience.
Mute myself. Okay, there's a lot of questions, and I think I'm going to go first with this one about introducing legislation. It said, will you be introducing legislation that would empower unions to organize all public workers in the state of Maryland? I have asked this of Governor-elect Moore, whether he would support such legislation, and he said that he would support it. It's nonsensical to have to introduce bills to permit Hartford County librarians to organize. There should be an omnibus bill that includes the right to organize for any public employees in the state.
Thanks for the question. As it pertains to myself, I don't have an intention to file such a bill because it's not been brought to me. And I think for that type of bill, you need to have a coalition of people in support of it. You need to have some buy-in from leadership, and you should probably consider having people that serve on the actual committees that deal with the issue. So I would absolutely support it. It is the first time that anyone has asked about me filing it. I'd co-sponsor it. We're getting close to session. And so if there's somebody already working on it, I'd much prefer to work with someone else. But if there is no one else, I'd absolutely consider sponsoring it myself.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. Look, I support collective bargaining for all workers across the state. Most of those bills go to finance in the Senate, and usually they try to have a member of the finance committee to introduce it. You know, it's taken different shapes. There have been bills to allow higher ed, community colleges, different segments. But if there was an omnibus bill that stayed within the law, I would support it. I just haven't heard that discussion take place yet.
Okay, we are going to go, we have some, we have two people in here, Ifioma and I think, I know I've already lost the other name. Dia, I'm sorry, who wanted to ask about below sub-minimum wage for tipped workers.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Ifomi Zimako, and I'm a worker organizer here in Maryland for One Fair Wage. We advocate for tip workers to make a full minimum wage plus tips on top, and we're asking if we can be included in the minimum wage bill. Here I have Dia King, a tip worker, on the call with us. Dia?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Give me a hot second. All right. The minimum wage, the sub-minimum wage is a legacy of slavery. After emancipation, the restaurant industry sought to hire new freed Black people without paying them, forcing them to live on tips. This concept was made law, excluding a workforce of mostly Black women from full minimum wage, even when our workers received the federal minimum wage as part of the New Deal in 1938. Today, Maryland remains one of 43 states that permits this business model built on slavery and has allowed a workforce that is overwhelmingly women and disproportionately women of color to continue to receive a sub-minimum wage 150 years since emancipation. 7 states are faring better with one fair wage. For decades, 7 states did it differently. See, California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Montana, Arkansas, and Minnesota all require a full minimum wage with tips on tops. These states have higher restaurant job growth rates, small business growth rates, and tipping averages than Maryland. They also have 1/2 the rate of sexual harassment in the restaurant industry and lost fewer restaurants during the pandemic than Maryland. The sub-minimum wage was always a source of economic race and gender injustice. The sub-minimum wage for tip workers was a problem long before the pandemic for a workforce of several 100,000 tip workers in Maryland who are overwhelmingly women working in casual restaurants and bars.
So, Dee, I'm just going to interrupt you. Let's hear from the senators what their position is on ending the sub-minimum tipped wage and perhaps accelerating the minimum wage implementation as well.
Jill, you want to go first, or you want me to?
You can go first.
Okay, I'm right outside of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has passed this twice. I support it. I think $15 for service workers in restaurants is totally appropriate. They shouldn't be treated as second-class citizens. I don't know how we're going to get it in, whether it's into the existing $15 law or new legislation, or how that'll take place, but I will fully support it and be a co-sponsor of any legislation to do just that.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Senator Pinsky.
So I agree, and I actually wanted you to go first, Senator Pinsky, because you've been around in the Senate longer, and even back all the years we were talking about the minimum wage and raising it, and it's such a heavy lift even to get what we got, which is very slow to even implement the minuscule floor that we got. And so I wanted to hear from you, Senator Pinsky, because I fully support it, but I don't have an extraordinarily optimistic view that that's something that will pass this year. I think that over the 4-year term, it should be raised, and it should be something where you gather more support with, build coalitions and with all the unions that you can get in support of it. And you have to make the case to the legislators. You have to get all of us like one-on-one, and then build a coalition amongst legislators to get some buy-in from leadership, something that heavy. There was a lot of calculation that went into what was passed. And I absolutely think it doesn't go far enough. And I absolutely think it's too long in implementation. And I absolutely support this. But Senator Pinsky and I, and even Delegate Ruth and Delegate Acevero and Delegate Vaughn, Delegate Stewart that are on the call, we're likely to be people that support this, I think, but we unfortunately are not the majority. And so it's going to take some work on your part, is what I think you should.
And let me just add quickly, I'm going to have to excuse myself. Senator Carter twice has mentioned building coalitions. And it's very important to understand you can have a great senator or great delegate who believes in their heart, and they can give a great floor speech, but that doesn't mean it's going to move either chamber. You have to create street heat. Jesse Jackson always talked about street heat. You got to mobilize from the base. You need thousands of people who are demanding the same thing. That's generally when we've had our success, when we have a symbiotic relationship between mobilizing and organizing on the ground and people giving voice to those demands in Annapolis. So I want to really put an exclamation point to the points about coalition building. A great idea is a great idea, but it stays simply a great idea unless we can build the mobilization and the political will and support for it. So thank you for the opportunity to join you tonight.
Thank you for having us.
I also want to say, Foma, we met at the Black Caucus event, and I told you then that I would support it and I would work with you to help you strategize on how to make this happen. And so that offer still stands. But again, I don't want to be negative at all. I hope I'm not sounding negative. I just know the heavy lift that everything takes in this group, in this body, in this institution. And we all kind of do.
I appreciate you, Senator Carter. Our big stance is that because DC just won, that we've talked to a lot of workers and they are actually migrating to DC for a better wage. So in order to keep our restaurants here in Maryland staffed, we think it'd be best to raise the sub-minimum wage.
All right, and I want to thank you so much, FOMA, for joining us, and we really love working with the One Fair Wage. Time to move to the delegates. Back to you, Sheila.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Senator Carter, and Senator Pinsky, I think, has already left, but we really appreciate both of you being here. So I'm going to move to Delegate Julie Palakovich Carr. She has been a leader on the issue of progressive taxation and frankly knows more about it than most of us do. She's also in 2022, she sponsored the Vision Zero Implementation Act of 2022 to reduce pedestrian and bicycle fatalities. She was elected to the House of Delegates in 2018, representing District 17. She serves on the Ways and Means Committee, is chair now of the Montgomery County Delegation, and secretary of the Transit Caucus. She's a scientist by training with a master's degree in biology. And so thank you so much, Delegate, for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sheila, for the kind introduction. Yeah, I always love the opportunity to talk about tax policy and the fiscal side of things because, tonight we're talking about a lot of great progressive ideas, and many of them hinge on the ability of the state to fund them. And right now, our state's fiscal forecast is looking pretty good. That's the good news. We have a budget surplus. We had money left over from last year. We've been saving money for if there's another recession, which is likely to come, according to many economists. But the surpluses aren't so big that we can fund everything. And there's also this bigger issue of our tax code just being inherently unfair. The wealthiest 1% of individuals in Maryland, and that's people who are making more than $500,000 a year in income, pay a smaller share of their income in taxes than the rest of us do. And so we really need to address this, fundamental inequity in our tax code, as well as raise the revenues that we need for all of the great programs that we're talking about tonight. And I think especially with our new governor coming in and having some great and ambitious ideas, including a much broader expansion of pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds. We know how foundational early education is and how important that is to helping these young kids grow up to be Marylanders who are really prepared to be in the workforce and to be productive citizens. But programs like that are very expensive. This year, we're going to see reintroductions of a number of bills, as well as some new legislation that are going to get at these fundamental inequities in our tax code, as well as have the benefit of raising money for the state. Maryland is actually going to be part of a national effort. There's at least 10 states where the legislatures, where members of the legislature have committed to introducing legislation on taxing wealth. Here in Maryland, that's likely to take the shape of taxing, addressing the estate tax. So millionaires who are leaving on large estates to family members are not paying a fair share of taxes on that. I'm personally reintroducing a bill to have a surtax on capital gains. So, this is money people are earning not from wages, not from work, but because they have assets like stocks or real estate and are earning passive income on that. And they really should be paying a higher share of taxes on those sorts of assets. I'll say at the other end of the income spectrum, there's a need for a focus there too. And I think this is actually probably one of the areas where we'll see the most progress this session. A couple of years ago, the legislature, we passed a big expansion of our earned income tax credit, which is a really successful anti-poverty program that helps low-income families who are working. Many of them have kids, but just need some additional help to get out of poverty or to stay out of poverty. And that really was a great piece of legislation. Not only did we increase the benefits, but we really expanded who is eligible for that program, including many immigrants or mixed status families that include non-US citizens who had previously been excluded. The bad news was that was only a 2-year program. That program actually is ending, and unless we take action, those families will be locked back out of the earned income tax credit. But from everything I'm hearing, I'm actually pretty optimistic that we're going to get that done this session. There's a number of other things I could go into. I'll just point to maybe one other success, an area for potential action this session on the tax front, which has to do actually with local income taxes. A couple of years ago, Senator Jim Rosapep and I sponsored legislation to end the flat taxes of local income tax. It's incredibly regressive, and we had some success there. And actually, Anne Arundel County this last year became the very first jurisdiction in Maryland to take advantage of that new legislation. So they have cut taxes for the very lowest incomes in their county in terms of their local income taxes, which is great. We want to make sure that other counties can take advantage of that, but it's going to require additional legislation. So that'll be another issue for this session.
Great. Thank you so much. And so, the progressive taxation, you talked about how we're not going to have surpluses forever, and we need to make sure we fund programs, but that also addresses income inequality as well. And is that?
Yes. I think we can get a twofer with this. It really is an opportunity to improve things and to make a difference in terms of most Marylanders' pockets. and kind of what they're feeling at home, especially with all of the increased costs this year and inflation, rents going up, housing prices going up. So I think there is good opportunity there. And the good news is like these tax changes, and I think everyone on this call gets it, is these actually are very populist and popular. People seem to understand this. Unfortunately, many politicians don't, and tend to shy away from taking up tax issues. But I think this is one issue where you look at Maryland, you look nationally and across the board. People of all political stripes really do support making changes here.
Great. Thank you so much. And so if you can stand by, we're going to have some questions from the audience coming up. I'm now going to go to Delegate Vaughn Stewart. Delegate Stewart was first elected to the Maryland House of Delegates in 2018, representing District 19 in Montgomery County. He currently serves on the Environment and Transportation Committee. He's been a leader on housing affordability, environmental justice, ethics reform, and immigrant rights, among other things. Delegate Stewart, welcome. We're really glad to have you. And what can you tell us about the issues of the session?
Sure. Thank you so much, Sheila. Thanks to Our Revolution for the invitation. It's awesome to be here tonight with everyone. It's thrilling to be here with some of my favorite legislators in the General Assembly. And I really think it's an exciting time for Maryland. I'm excited for the session. I'm excited about this upcoming 4-year term. We elected new progressives to the General Assembly. We protected some vulnerable progressive incumbents who we really needed to hang on to. And your elected progressives in Annapolis are more organized than ever as a faction. I'm also excited about the Democratic trifecta. We have an impressive new governor who seems poised to prioritize some of our big moral problems like child poverty. And we also have a dynamic new lieutenant governor who has actually been very involved with Our Revolution in the past. And of course, there are more shoes to drop, as Senator Pinsky alluded to. What will the governor's agenda look like? Who is the governor going to appoint to head the various agencies? Who is going to snag some of these open leadership spots in the General Assembly? Those are 3 questions that we all need to watch carefully and closely as those storylines play out in the next few weeks, because they'll all have big impacts on what the session ultimately ends up looking like. But as my Senate colleagues both said, I really think now is the time to deliver. This Democrats had a resounding victory in November. We have a real mandate for bold action. Maryland is the wealthiest state and the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And thanks to the federal government, we're sitting on an unheard of structural surplus right now. So I really think now is the time for us to all act boldly and decisively to finally ensure that every single Marylander is guaranteed a dignified life. I don't think that's too much to ask. And as far as my own agenda, as Sheila alluded to, I'm really focused on housing again. I think we as Democrats are really good at saying that housing is a human right, but we're not as good at guaranteeing housing to become a human right. We're not as good at following through on the fancy buzzwords and catchphrases. So just a quick laundry list. I have a bill to fund thousands of units of mixed income green public housing. I feel optimistic about that this year. I'm introducing a bill to fund whole home retrofits for working class Marylanders based on a successful bill that passed in Pennsylvania. I have a bill to make it easier for tenants to sue their landlords as a group for uninhabitable condition and uninhabitable conditions in their apartments and their homes. And I'm working on a bill with a coalition of legislators to create a state level housing voucher program modeled after the federal government's Section 8 program that I'm really excited about. And I think has a really a big opportunity to be transformative, I think, for a lot of Marylanders. I'm also really focused on the environment, on the Chesapeake Bay, and on climate change. I'm reintroducing a bill called the Reclaim Renewable Energy Act, which would end our state's horrific practice of subsidizing trash incineration and calling it clean energy. This bill will do a number of good things, including lowering our utility bills, mitigating climate change, cleaning up our air, reducing child asthma, and also it'll allow us to redirect these subsidies from trash burning to good paying union jobs in the actual clean energy sector like wind. And finally, I'm really focused on economic justice and workers' rights. I have a number of bills in this area. Here are 2 that I'm especially energetic about. One is a bill to encourage businesses to move to a 4-day work week. which I'm really passionate about. I'm a big believer in free time and leisure time personally. And I also am reintroducing a bill that I'm pretty optimistic about that it's a little bit, it sounds a little bit weird, but it's really important. It guarantees the right for retail workers to sit down during their shift. There is a whole class of workers in our grocery stores and a number of other businesses that we shop at who are forced to stand up for the entirety of their shifts, even though standing up is not remotely connected to how well they can perform their job. And so this bill would prohibit employers from forcing their workers to stand, and actually they would have to provide suitable seating for their workers. And so with that, I will send it back to you, Sheila, and answer any questions. But again, it's an honor to be here with a lot of my friends. I see a lot of familiar names in the attendee list, and I'm really excited about what we can do come January.
Great. Thank you so much, and really appreciate your work on housing. It's really super important. I know, you might have mentioned this and I missed it, but in the past you've done some work on like mixed income housing. Are you doing anything with that this session?
Yeah, I did mention that. So I am bringing back a bill. Sorry, I mean, no need to apologize. However, I went through it pretty quickly, but I am putting in a bill to fund mixed income public housing. Sometimes it's called social housing. Montgomery County, actually, our Housing Opportunities Commission has become really rapidly a nationwide leader in this area. They've been able to leverage public-private partnerships, the good kind, not like the kind that the governor wanted to use to widen the Beltway in 270. But they managed to leverage some creative partnerships and some creative housing finance arrangements to use very little money in county funds to generate a lot of affordable housing. And so the bill essentially is meant to reward counties that do interesting and innovative things in the area of housing finance, to see if we could go a little bit further on the state level to put some dollars forward and leverage those to create a lot more units. Because we have a genuine affordable housing crisis, and there's a lot of aspects to it. I'm someone who believes that we should throw the whole kitchen sink at it. And one aspect of it is that we just simply don't have enough affordable homes, especially in places like Montgomery County.
And can you just speak briefly, and then we need to move on, about why it's important for those affordable homes to be part of mixed income or social housing?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a big believer in public and social housing because there's no profit involved. So in other words, there's no middlemen or private entities that have to earn a profit. It's government housing. I view it kind of as a public option for housing in the same way that we sort of tried to get a public option in the healthcare arena and unfortunately fell short. And I think what's important about mixed income public housing in particular is that a lot of folks mistakenly believe that public housing in this country failed in the 20th century, and that's why we stopped building it. But what really failed is the vision of public housing that suggests that we need to warehouse poor people and use public housing as a vehicle to do that. That basically, we need to concentrate poverty, as many poor people as we can, in a large, grotesque, not super attractive building or units, and place it as far away from jobs and opportunity as possible so that we can otherize that population and keep them away from thriving. And that form of public housing did largely fail. But what I'm proposing is what has succeeded across Europe and Asia, which may sound sort of utopian or idyllic here, but really is an extremely mundane idea for most of the rest of the world, which is for the government to build housing on its own.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to move on. If you could stick around for some questions at the end, that would be great. So now I'm going to go to Delegate Gabriel Acevero. Delegate Acevero represents District 39 in Montgomery County. He was elected in 2018 and serves on the Appropriations Committee. He has held leadership positions in the Legislative Black Caucus and the Latino Caucus. He's been a leader on police and juvenile justice reform, including introducing and fighting for the passage of Anton's Law. Delegate Acevero, welcome. Thank you for being here. And what do you see as on the horizon for the session?
Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks to OR for just creating space so that we can have a discussion about not just the next session, but really the next 4 years under a Democratic governor, a Democratic House of Delegates, and a Democratic State Senate. We picked up some seats in the House as well as in the Senate. and the governor's office. And so I'm just as excited as my Democratic colleagues in what we would, be able to accomplish over the next 4 years under new Democratic leadership. And so that gives me optimism, about a particular set of policies that I've been pushing for and championing for some time, and that includes guaranteed basic income as well as healthcare. But when we talk about healthcare, specifically, working towards the goal of single payer Medicare for all, which Maryland is the only state in the union that can actually get that done. And so we have an incoming governor whose background, is a nonprofit. And, we've had several conversations about guaranteed basic income. For folks who aren't familiar, guaranteed basic income is certainly not a new idea, one that we've seen a presidential candidate, bringing, renewed attention to, but one that, a policy that's been embraced by both Republicans and Democrats and proven to have a significant impact on poverty. And so what I would like to see in Maryland is the opportunity for us to build out a guaranteed basic income program so that we're taking care of those, who oftentimes are left behind from, by our economy. I think what the COVID-19 pandemic has shown is the value of direct cash assistance and the impact not just on families, but on our communities, but more specifically, where people who receive direct cash assistance spend their money and what they spend it on. And so guaranteed basic income, I'm really optimistic about over the next 4 years. It's something that Governor-elect Wes Moore, has implemented a pilot program, in his previous role in nonprofit. And this is something that he has indicated is, something that he's going to be championing, as well as a number of other poverty eliminating measures, to include child poverty, education, et cetera. And so another issue that I'll be revisiting is police accountability. Senator Carr talked a little bit about that. But, while we have, certainly done a good bit on police accountability, significant work remains. And that significant work is really represented in, issues that I and others have raised on the police accountability work group during the proceedings, from, making sure that we're ending no-knock warrants to ending qualified immunity in state court. Both measures that states, certainly more conservative than Maryland, have passed already. And so we need to ensure that we're doing the same to rooting out white nationalism in law enforcement, a serious problem that we are continuing to see with revelations from whether it's police chiefs or police departments across the country. And then doing more to ensure that we're protecting juveniles, but also, during interrogation process. We passed the Child Interrogation Act earlier this year that provides protections for juveniles during, police interactions. But what we have to do is ensure that we're ending the practice of police lying to juveniles, to kids. And that is something that is perfectly legal. There's so much more work that we need to do. I mentioned healthcare earlier. I'll be reintroducing the Healthy Maryland Act. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion over the next few sessions about healthcare in Maryland and what that looks like. We have a governor-elect that has indicated that he supports universal healthcare. We've, seen a number of my Democratic colleagues in leadership who have indicated that healthcare is a priority for them, from, incoming chair Delegate Jocelyn Pena-Melnick and others. And so we really have an opportunity to do something different on healthcare, and something big and ambitious. And my hope is that we will go as far as single payer. Cannabis, Senator Carter's talked a little bit about that with the referendum that passed. There's a lot of stuff that we still need to do with respect to the industry, around equity, around reparative justice. We have to revisit criminal justice reform. There are some things that we didn't do, from decriminalizing paraphernalia to ensuring that we are raising the amount that we've decriminalized to an ounce or more, ideally. But we're doing more to ensure that those who are currently incarcerated for nonviolent drug offenses, that listening to President Biden's call to take action at the state level. If folks remember, President Biden took some federal action on cannabis and cannabis-related arrests and those who are incarcerated. And he called on governors and state legislatures to take action at the state level because we have people who are languishing behind, jails and state penitentiaries for nonviolent drug offenses. And so if we legalize this and we're working towards equity and reparative justice, we got to free everyone that is currently incarcerated in state prisons for nonviolent drug offenses and ensuring automatic expungement. And we're not still doing this, putting folks through this administrative hassle. Lastly, campaign finance reform. And I'm going to mention this because I think it's particularly important, not just for the state legislature, but for a point that Senator Carter mentioned earlier about our judges and electing our judges. I think public campaign finance reform is not only a significant issue at the federal level, but one that states should be leading on. There is too much dark, unaccountable money in our federal and in our state politics, and it is corrosive and undemocratic. And we need to ensure that we're moving towards a public campaign finance system where you, the people of Maryland, have greater control and say in how decisions are made and not special interests and folks who, wheel and deal behind closed doors in an attempt to influence your representatives. And so my hope is that public campaign finance reform will be a priority over the next 4 years for Democratic leadership. We cannot just have it for the gubernatorial race. We need it for state legislatures. Really, we need it for, in my opinion, more elected offices on the ballots to include judges. Part of the argument that proponents of ending judicial elections have made is that we're putting judges through the throes of asking for money and campaigning and electioneering. But the way we address that problem of undue influence on judges is to ensure that we have publicly funded elections where judges are going to the people, making their case to the people, and their elections are being funded by the people. I just want to echo Senator Carter's concern about this effort to end judicial elections in Maryland. It is the third branch of government, and we really got to get serious and pay attention to that. I'll be introducing other things, but happy to continue the conversation and answer any questions about just what I'm working on and what's important. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for all your great work. And you've got some really important priorities there. I'm glad you're working on the universal basic income and the public financing are both really important. I want to go back for a minute to Anton's law, which you championed and which now some of the counties are violating, I think, the spirit of the law. My county, Baltimore County, and Montgomery County both have put into place review provisions where the officer and the FOP can review the requests and file a reverse MPIA. Can anything be done about that?
Absolutely. And I think there will be legislation being introduced. Senator Carter and I have talked about that sort of, legislation to tighten up any loopholes that, organizations like the Fraternal Order of Police that we see here in Montgomery County, FOP Lodge 35, has been trying to essentially wiggle out and skirt the intent and spirit of the law, Anton's law, which is to ensure transparency. And for folks who, aren't familiar, what Anton's law ensures is not just transparency in policing, but specifically ensuring that sustained and unsustained complaints and an officer's misconduct records, it's something that is accessible to the public, under the MPIA, and that there aren't any hindrances being placed in getting that information. And the reason why that's important is because we've noticed a pattern when it comes to abusive cops is that, there's a pattern of abuse and complaints that largely go ignored. And so by providing that kind of a transparency, we're able to use that as a tool to root out corrupt and abusive cops. And so what the FOP is attempting to do in Montgomery County is to provide an additional layer where they get to essentially see what is going to be put out or made available to the person that's requesting it or to the public. And I think that's something that really undermines Anton's law and why we should be working to ensure that we're strengthening both the law that was passed, but also the MPIA as well. I think this will be, one of many attempts by the FOP to skirt transparency, and so I think there's going to be laws coming down the pipeline this session or hopefully next session. But what we need to focus on is the other areas of police accountability that we've forgotten, which is, again, ending no-knock warrants, ending qualified immunity, addressing and rooting out white nationalism in law enforcement, and ensuring that we're holding elected prosecutors accountable. I think in one of the questions someone asked about prosecutors and holding them accountable when it comes to policing. I completely agree. And I introduced a bill that would ensure that any state's attorney or attorney general that accepts contributions from police organizations to include the FOP must recuse themselves then from investigating and prosecuting those cases.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to move back to Kat for some questions. If it would be possible for everybody to stick around another 5 or maybe 10 minutes so we could get in a few questions. We're running a little bit over time. Thanks. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kat at this point.
Okay, there's so many. I think some of them just got answered about the MPIA, so I'm going to skip those too. There's one interesting one here about the Inflation Reduction Act providing assistance to poverty income area houses to move from fossil fuels to electricity for heating and air conditioning. Can we expand such assistance with the state of Maryland? Anyone be able to answer that?
Yeah, I can tackle this one. I have a pretty similar bill to this topic. So we are the beneficiaries of a lot of federal cash right now that we can use. We have a fair amount of flexibility to use them, which is pretty exciting. And one of them does revolve around transitioning, moving homes to make repairs, make retrofits to make them more sustainable. And so I have a bill. It's modeled after a left-wing senator in Pennsylvania named Nikhil Saval was able to accomplish, actually with bipartisan support, called the Whole Home Retrofits Bill. It's now a law in Pennsylvania. I'm introducing a similar piece of legislation here in Maryland that basically would leverage those federal dollars that you mentioned in your question to allow Maryland homeowners below a certain income level to, for example, make energy efficiency retrofits to lower their utility costs down the road, also to age in place as a way to help Maryland seniors make accessibility retrofits to their home. And then finally, just for working class Marylanders to be able to retrofit their home in the name of creating more habitable living conditions to bring their home up to code to make it a more comfortable place to live. Right now, Maryland kind of has a hodgepodge of loan programs that are not very generous and have really narrow eligibility requirements if you do want to retrofit or to upgrade your home, either for sustainability reasons or any other reasons. And so this bill would hopefully create a program that could serve as a one-stop shop and would make it a lot easier for people to access money that they could then turn around and make their home both a better place to live and a more affordable place to live in the long run.
Thank you. We have another interesting one. Someone is asking, who is holding up the special elections bill in the House?
I can answer this. So, I mean, there's been an effort for a number of years to change basically how vacancies in the legislature are filled under our state's Constitution. Now, the central committee of the same party as the outgoing member gets to nominate one or more people, and then the governor ultimately has to approve that. I mean, it isn't democratic. So going to special elections certainly would put, the power back into the hands of voters of that district, and that is in fact about half of states do in the U.S. It has faced a very strong political headwind, especially in the House. The Senate actually did pass this legislation 2 years in a row this last session, but there is a number of people on the House side who are not willing to go this direction. So I would not be optimistic that we would see movement on a special elections bill this coming year.
Yeah, and I would just add quickly, it's David Moon and Delegate David Moon and Senator Clarence Lamb who've historically had this. I don't know if they're bringing it back, but I would just add that I really hope that we can make some headway in the General Assembly on this sort of idea and to reform central committees. But absent that, I'm really enthused by what the Montgomery County Central Committee, or at least some members of the Montgomery County Central Committee, have been doing lately, which is trying to reform that body and how the appointment process works as much as they can themselves. Now, that's not to say the General Assembly shouldn't step in, but I've been really inspired to witness what they're trying to do to sort of clean things up and make it more transparent and make it more democratic on their own. And I think, everyone should watch that space, because I think that if they're able to pull off some reforms there in the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee, it could unleash a wave of sort of central committee driven reforms throughout the state.
And I'll just sorry to take a second bite of the apple on this one. Senator Lamb and I actually are considering legislation for this session to reform the appointment process, because even under the Senate bill, Senate passed bill, there would still be appointments happening, and we do need more safeguards in terms of transparency and public input on that. So that's still in the early stages, though.
Okay, I have one here. It's a little bit more about climate, and it says, can someone address bold and new ideas for addressing plastic pollution, auto emissions, and requiring commercial landlords to set thermostats higher in the summer and lower in the winter? Anyone want to take that?
I guess that's probably me again. I'm not familiar with with the thermostat idea necessarily. I don't think that's something that's come up in the General Assembly. Certainly for auto emissions, we have a long way to go. I mean, I think that obviously we have done a number of things on the margins to sort of promote electric vehicle access. I'm in support of that. I think we need to do more around charging infrastructure. We've done a pretty good job of trying to start transitioning our bus fleet and our public vehicle fleet to electric vehicles. That's also something I support. But, we're not going to be able to totally EV our way out of auto emissions. We really need to be more robustly funding public transit, and also to think about land use, because the idea that we're going to have this future where we're still all sprawled out and we all have single family homes that are super far away and we all have to drive really long distances on crowded highways to get to work. And as long as we're driving EVs, everything's going to be fine. That's just not the reality. And so what I've said for a long time is just like this past 4-year term, the legislature created a Kerwin commission around how we could create a first-rate, first-class, world-renowned public education system. I would really love to see a Kerwin-esque commission on public transit, because if you go to states like New York and New Jersey, you quickly become aware about how much Maryland is getting blown out of the water, both in terms of heavy rail, light rail, commuter rail. Mark is just is no longer, if it ever was, anything close to a gold or silver standard in this space. And we're a dense enough state, we're a small enough state where there's no reason why we can't create a world-class public transportation system. I think this is something that the incoming governor and lieutenant governor talked about. And I really think this is a huge opportunity, one of the many in the next 4 years, to not only make it easier for folks to get around, to get to jobs, to get to opportunity, but also to cut emissions.
Thank you. I have a question very specific. How will the cannabis reform bill be implemented now that question 4 has passed?
I can take that question. So the question 4 passed, and that essentially takes effect in 2023. I think that's important to point out. Cannabis is not legal right now. It will be in 2023. What we have to do when we come back in January is essentially deal with some regulatory industry-related issues. I think we should be revisiting our criminal legal system as it relates to drug policy. I think we definitely need to look at the reparative justice piece of this. This industry is poised to make billions. It's a burgeoning industry, and just where that money is going to be spent, what it's going to be used on, and how we're using it to ensure that we're repairing the harm that was done to the communities that have been disproportionately and really continue to be impacted by the drug war. And so in terms of implementation, there are certain things, and I think it's important to point out that question 4, while voters did vote to legalize adult recreational cannabis, that triggers another piece of legislation. And that's important to point out, that sets up a fund, a reparative fund that sets up certain requirements as far as healthcare, and also sets aside, as Senator Carr to point out, a percentage for certain communities where we've seen arrests, etc. And so it does a good bit of stuff, but it does not in any way address some of the other points that we mentioned, which is the regulatory piece, which is the equity piece, the licensures, the reparative piece, what this fund will be doing, when revenues start coming in, et cetera. A lot around social equity. So there's a lot that we still need to do, but as far as implementation, that's going to happen next year. That is only to legalize adult recreational cannabis.
Thank you. And we've had so many questions, and I don't think we're going to possibly get to all of them, but I have one very important one of my own. How do we help you pass this type of legislation? How do regular citizens like us that are in here right now listening to you help you get this done?
Let's go down the line. Each of you got 30 seconds.
I'll start.
Well, I mean, be engaged. Oh, go ahead, Gabe. Go ahead.
I'll say really quickly, one, know who represents you. Go to mdelect.net. That is the first thing. If you don't know who represents you, then you don't know who you need to be engaging to ensure that we're getting the policy outcomes that we want. Education is the first thing. Who represents you? Second is education on the issue, and you can do that in coalition with other people, other groups. Learn about the issue, about the bill, etc., what it is that you're advancing. And third, continue to pay attention to what happens. I tell people this all the time. Your state legislature, the majority of the issues that impact your everyday life is decided at the state level, not the federal. What we do matters. I don't want to say more than the federal, but I kind of want to say more than the federal.
I won't disagree with that. I'll just say to add to that, I think it's really important to stay, aware of what's happening in Annapolis. Many of us live in parts of the state, especially I'd say in the DC area, where there is not good news coverage of what's happening in Annapolis. And I always recommend to folks either subscribing to Maryland Matters, which is a free news source, or if you're looking for a paid or willing to do a paid newspaper subscription, the Baltimore Sun. They really do have the best coverage of what's going on in Annapolis, and so that you can be aware of kind of what the big issues are, what the legislative proposals that are moving through. Unfortunately, the Washington Post doesn't do a great job on that front. So I would encourage people to get subscribe to either of those news outlets. And otherwise, don't hesitate to reach out. We hear from surprisingly few numbers of constituents in the session and over the course of the year. So your email actually does stand out.
Yeah, I will definitely echo the last point that Julie just made. On the federal level, I mean, to reference Gabe's point too, I think members of Congress are inundated with emails and calls all the time. I was an intern briefly for congressional office. The members of Congress absolutely never read those emails. There are just simply too many of them. But that's not how state legislative offices work. We actually do oftentimes read our emails. At least our staffers are seeing them and relaying them to us. We just don't get that many, not nearly on the same scale as members of Congress. And so if you write especially a thoughtful email to your state legislators, it's going to make an impact. So come testify. If there's a bill you like, email the legislator who sponsored the bill and ask how you can help. Generally, the more involved or the more effort you put into contacting legislators, the more impactful it's going to be. So if you do one of those form emails, God bless you. It's better than nothing, but you obviously only copy and pasted something. It didn't take you a whole lot of time, and it's not going to be as effective if you spend 2 more extra minutes and state your personal story, state your connection to the community and to that legislator. Maybe you voted for them, maybe you've been disappointed by them. State your own personal story. It's going to be so much more impactful than just doing a Control-C, Control-V situation. And then lastly, I would say, I know that I've gone over 60 seconds, I think, but I would just say that y'all are really our only hope. I mean, all we can do here is on your backs. You know, we operate because we have the power of the people behind us. And the only way ultimately that anything happens in Annapolis that's positive or progressive is when organized people defeat organized money. That's the only way to defeat organized money. And so we need you guys. We need to all work together. We need to all let our voices heard, and we all need to be as organized as possible if we're going to pass any single piece of legislation that we've talked about this evening.
All right. I guess Sheila's not with us in this moment. I want to thank her so much. What a tremendous job. There you are, Sheila. Thank you so much. Just amazing organizing this, putting this together and moderating it with 6, and I include you, of course, tremendous legislators. And we look at you guys and we think, well, why isn't change possible? Is the answer it is, Sheila? Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Change is possible, and it's important for all of us to stay engaged. And I echo what the panelists said about. I mean, all the points that they made are good points, and it really it takes a groundswell of movement to make these things happen. We can't do it alone. We need you.
All right, so that's going to bring us just about to the end of our program. We thank our 6 great legislators, Kat and Francis, of course, for the questions and the introductions. Thank you both so much. I don't know what to say. I've gotten to know pretty much everyone on this call, and it's my honor that we are represented by, all of them. Julie, Vaughn, Gabe, I use the first name because I do talk to them by first name, Paul, Pinsky, and Senator Carter, who is just a wonderful person. I mean, she's just a great person. They all are. All right, that's just about it. We thank you all. How can you make a difference? You heard from the delegates. You heard from the senators. Join our Maryland team. We'll apply the street heat. Join it. alrev.us/MD team. I'm going to skip over the ask for money. Forget about that. Join our Maryland team, alrev.us/MD team there. I'm skipping the ask for money. Have a great holiday season. We'll end it with our little chant. I'll say when we organize, you say we win. When we organize,
we
win.
When we organize,
We win.
One more time. When we organize,
We win.
Have a great holiday, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.